So, at the time of this recording, we are at the business end of the 2022 US Open, and I really haven't gotten my thoughts off yet on much of the tournament, and boy, has it been an eventful one, putting it lightly. And at least before the semi-final stage, I wanted to get my thoughts off on a lot of what has happened in this tournament so far, give my own takeaways from this year's US Open thus far. It's been a very unique US Open, a lot of the usual suspects not there or knocked out at this point, which is actually a perfect segue into my first takeaway, which is actually about Frances Tiafoe, who pulled the most recent and biggest upset, I think, of the men's tournament so far, defeating Rafael Nadal. For Frances, my takeaway really was that this was a long time coming. I have thought of Frances Tiafoe ability-wise as one of the, if not the most naturally gifted of the American men right now. I've really been a fan of his upside ever since that title run in Delray Beach in 2018, and although it is his only title to date, I believe, Frances really pulled off one of the more impressive 250 runs you will ever see that year. Beat Del Potro, beat Hyun Chung, who was great at the beginning of that year, and then Shapovalov en route to capturing that title. Needless to say, I think a lot of people have seen the talent on display since like 2017-ish. And then you add on the showmanship and how the guy really is wired to play these big matches on Ash or in front of a big American crowd. He really lives for it. Fourth round appearance, I believe, a year ago in a narrow loss to FAA. And this year he one-ups himself, at least for the time being, making the quarters, defeating Rafael Nadal in what I believe was the match of his life to this point. Just about every part of Frances's game was clicking, firing on all cylinders, and I think most impressively, there never came a moment where there was a dip. So many times, all these guys, Nadal and Djokovic, need is that one blink, that one dip that allows them to really take control of a match even when they're off. And in this case, Nadal did still ask the questions, but Tiafoe had the answer every single time. And that really has not been the norm with Frances. He's usually been very streaky, even within matches, but on this day, he just simply was not going to be denied. Executed the beat Nadal playbook to perfection, took the ball on the rise early so well again and again, and with the shoulders completely opened up in that incredible return game at 3-5 in the last game of the match. You could tell it just seemed like a date with destiny, and I'm very happy for him. With these last two matches against Diego and Rafa, it's great to see him bringing his best tennis to a big stage at last. My next takeaway is the other side of the coin in Rafael Nadal, and my takeaway there is that I think Rafa was not ready. I did make a point when I picked him to win the title at the beginning of this tournament that I was really banking on the fact that he has been able to do these quick turnarounds so many times and build his form up without really needing that much prep. But I did say that acknowledging how difficult it is, no matter how many times he'd done it before. With one lead-up match, that was always just going to be a factor, regardless of whether he rounded into form later or not. And as far as his performance throughout the tournament, he never really got much rhythm going. Dropped the opening set in his first two rounds, and I think the most alarming was the Fognini match because the way he started that match was some of the worst tennis I've ever seen him play in a major. Obviously, he, killed Gasquet after that, but I didn't really even think Nadal was that razor sharp in that match. Felt like more of a product of the matchup being so overwhelmingly in Nadal's favor, and even more so now with Richard even older. The Tiafoe match I honestly think was the best Nadal showing this whole tournament, but for his standards I think it's fair to say that it was still below par. Inexplicably poor returning, and that was a theme even in his one match in Cincinnati. He was missing a lot of makeable second serve returns, And if he wasn't doing that, he was just plain attackable off the return, not really doing much with it. I can't definitively sit here and say that the ab was still an issue. Obviously, he was out there, so it couldn't have been that bad. But I will say, from a confidence perspective, it did seem like he was guarding that ab and not really trying to exert himself too much on the serve. He was rocking the abbreviated serve motion and lower ball toss, and I think that did mess with him on serve with, abnormally low first serve percentages in all his matches pretty much, and more doubles than we're accustomed to. I believe for the tournament he had almost as many doubles as aces, but at the end of the day, it just wasn't meant to be this year for him in New York. That's kind of just the reality of being 36 at the top of this game. It's just not realistic for the body to snap back together so quickly and be raring to go for every match. Ultimately, it was not meant to be for Rafa in New York this year. Well-deserved win by Francis Tiafoe, and it goes without saying still that there's a lot to be proud and happy about for Nadal and his 2022 Slam season. Similarly, my next takeaway had to do with a top seed who was upset in the fourth round, and that was Daniil Medvedev, courtesy of Nick Kyrgios. And for Daniil, what I really have to say is I think it's time to go back to the drawing board. It was clear heading into this event that he had not been the same since January, losing that Aussie Open final, and ultimately I think he paid dearly for that. He didn't play a bad match at all, but as it seemed throughout the last couple of months, something was missing, and ultimately Nick Kyrgios made him pay for that. Tale of two halves. I think the first two sets were nip and tuck. I mean, Medvedev did pull away in the second, but after that, Nick was firmly in charge for the remainder of the match. And now, maybe for better, with that US Open title defense no longer on the horizon, it should be a good time for Daniil Medvedev to reset. Number one ranking and title defense really isn't looming over his head anymore, and I think historically those environments have been more conducive to success for him because he really has performed way better as the underdog. So I do think that the fall post-US Open swing will be great for Medvedev to build back some of that confidence, but when I say back to the drawing board, I don't just mean in the sense of redeeming this season or getting better moving forward. I'm also talking about from the standpoint of that book being out now at this point, of serving and volleying really being able to exploit Medvedev's deep return position. I think more and more guys have caught on to this, and if you're good enough at the net, I just don't think Medvedev has adapted enough to try to work around that. You've seen Kyrgios use it pretty much endlessly in their last two matches in this summer hardcourt swing. Both times by the end you could see it visibly frustrated Medvedev, but there really was no answer from him because fundamentally with how flat his ground strokes are, he's just not good enough passing on the return or on the dead run. So because of that, for Daniil Medvedev, I think it is time to reset in more ways than one. The next takeaway, Jannik Sinner has become a metronome of consistency. You look at Jannik Sinner's season this year, and I really cannot sum it up any better because you look down the results, and context does matter in this sense because there's only one appearance where he's gone beyond a quarterfinal, and that was his one title on the year in Umag. However, if you've actually been watching Jannik Sinner and his matches, you know that a lot of that is marked up to bad injury luck throughout the year and just off the eye test since the beginning of the season from Miami or so. It's been pretty visible that he appears to be a much improved player. I do think that Darren Cahill has had quite the positive impact on Jannik, and under him now this year, he has a peak level that is formidable and can hang with or beat just about anybody. And that is something that I don't think I would have said about Sinner prior to this year. You look through Sinner's results this year, and in spite not going to a semifinal in all but one event, there have been quarters after quarters and really no terrible losses on the board that weren't marked up to injury. In making the quarterfinals in the Big Apple, I believe that he became the youngest player since Novak Djokovic to reach quarters at least of all 4 slams. And I think so much of that has gone under the radar, hence my label of metronomic consistency. He's just been chipping away all year, quietly improving to become a legitimate major contender over these last 2 slams. And the guy that he will be facing in said US Open quarterfinal tonight is Carlos Alcaraz. To my eye, Carlos has looked very good so far this US Open, but my takeaway for Carlos this tournament, especially now given all that's happened with Nadal losing and with this video being recorded over the course of 2 days, Kyrgios losing last night, my takeaway for him so far is regarding the stakes, and as far as that is concerned, I think that this upcoming match between Carlos Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner is going to be the most important match of Alcaraz's career to this point. For Carlos, there is obviously number 1 on the line. Likewise, for many others, there is a golden opportunity here to snag a maiden major. And for Alcaraz, having lost 2 matches this summer to Jannik Sinner on grass and then clay, a third loss here in the same summer would really hammer home a definite early matchup edge. Albeit very early, but a matchup edge nonetheless for Jannik Sinner in their rivalry, one that potentially could field the next generation of fans and be the marquee rivalry for the next couple of years. And considering that I believe Alcaraz has been in better form through this tournament so far than Sinner, and also that I feel that Carlos's best surface will be hard courts, this really should be the match where he hits back in this 2-match skid to Sinner. I did predict that in my pre-tournament predictions, but between the added pressure of youngest world number 1 in the Open era looming, combined with the Red Sea parting for both these men really, you would have to say the winner of this match is the favorite to win the title now at this point. But cumulatively, I think there is the most on the line here for Alcaraz, and we will see how he responds to that. So for my next takeaway, I mentioned Nick Kyrgios losing last night, and my idea for this takeaway really was after the Medvedev match, the day of his match with Khachanov. And I'm still going to include it in this video because I do think that it is still applicable, and that is that my Nick Kyrgios takes aged poorly through this tournament. I picked him to lose 3rd round to RBA in this tournament, and RBA didn't make it there. In retrospect, I don't think it would have mattered. I think Nick would have won that match. And what I really wanted to talk about was the way that I felt that Nick Kyrgios really hadn't improved all that much, save improved mentality as far as not checking out of points and portions of matches, as well as improving the fitness aspect. And boy, after that Medvedev match, I really was looking at what I said in that video funny. In spite of his loss, it still holds true. Nick Kyrgios definitely has improved a couple of pretty significant aspects of his game. I still do stand by that people underlook how much his serve does the heavy lifting in his game, but where I was wrong was in saying that his returning is still terrible. That is objectively not the case anymore. He is breaking more than ever seemingly, and just to the naked eye, his reflexes on return seem a lot better, and he was just attacking on return much more effectively than I have ever seen before. That Medvedev match in the 4th round was as good a match as I have ever seen him play. It's right up there with that win over Nadal in Wimbledon in 2014, and really any other performance you can list off in his career. That being said, what is between the eyes still is a big worry for Nick Kyrgios, in the sense that his temper is still a bit much and does tend to detrimentally affect him, get in his own head. He really did have his chances to win that match in the 3rd and 5th, and after not taking them, he kind of imploded at certain points in this match. Still reset, of course, to compete well into the end of this match. But in spite of the brilliant tennis he produced this US Open, he will rue a golden opportunity that he whiffed on. That being said, it would be dismissive of me not to shout out Karen Khachanov. 2018 Khachanov re-emerged last night. Really had me wondering, where has this guy been? Next, I'm going to talk about US Open semi-finalist Casper Ruud, and for him, my takeaway is Casper Ruud deserves his respect. It really has become this notion that Casper Ruud has accumulated as many points as he has on account of this field, as well as, how many tournaments he plays, how many 250s he wins. And, you might have a point in saying that the state of the field has something to do with it, but at the same time, Casper Ruud's results are what they are. You can debate circumstances all day long. This man has, off clay, made the semis of the World Tour Finals last year, finals in 2 hardcourt Masters, and now he is a US Open semi-finalist with a fine win over Matteo Berrettini in the quarters, and you would have to call him the favorite to make it to the final, which would put him in contention to finish this tournament world number 1, depending on how Carlos Alcaraz does. All of those results should be more than enough to shed this clay court merchant or 250 merchant label, and it really does go to show how consistency week in and week out isn't valued enough. People may forget that Casper Ruud missed the Australian Open earlier this year, and in spite of that, he is in striking distance. That should go to show what a solid year he has put together from start to finish. And there isn't that big title win, but there are finals in Miami and Canada, final of the French Open, and now semi of the US Open at the very least. And for someone that will be turning 24 in December, in this day and age where we haven't had a young prodigy for so long, that is fantastic progression over the course of a single year. And people should be able to acknowledge that even while thinking that he is not the caliber of player that could be number 1 as early as next week. So in line with the number 1 race, pretty much, my next takeaway is that this has been the most topsy-turvy year at the top of the game, and this tournament in particular has been the most upset-prone that we have seen in a very, very long time. I would say probably closing in on a decade since Wimbledon 2013. Given prep and form for so many players early in this tournament, it's not that surprising that the draw was absolutely blown open, but the loss of the likes of Medvedev and Nadal absolutely was still a shock. Both out before the quarterfinals at that. And additionally, we saw 2 shocks in the first round with Taylor Fritz and Stefanos Tsitsipas, who both had some big results coming into this tournament and definitely were not expected to flop in the first round. Fritz in particular, I know a lot of people loved his draw enough to pick him to the semifinals, myself included. And now we see 3 different possibilities for number 1 at the end of this tournament, with Nadal, Alcaraz, and Ruud all having claims for it, following Medvedev falling way short of defending his title here in New York. And I think that a lot has gone into that. There's a lot of context required. There's been so many guys suffering injuries this year, and it's really hampered their prep or just prevented them from winning more than they probably would have. And you see that in the cases of Nadal in between these slams, Sinner, Berrettini, Novak, of course, pretty much only playing from April to July. Zverev, of course, injured after Roland Garros. And that in tandem with pretty much all the next-gen guys, with Zverev, Medvedev, and Tsitsipas regressing from their form from a year ago, and other breakouts like Alcaraz most notably, but FAA, Sinner taking a step forward, as noted, Casper Ruud also taking a step forward, and it really has made for some very wonky ranking scenarios. And in tandem, I think it has also influenced heavily how upset-prone this year's US Open has been. But for my next takeaway, transitioning away from men's tennis into women's tennis, which has been rare on this channel, but we will make an exception because Serena Williams was evolving away from tennis at this year's US Open. There was much anticipation build around this tournament, mainly for that. And my takeaway from the Serena farewell tour was that Serena Williams really had a different and very rare type of pull and gravity about her. I say this in the sense that she is one of the most captivating athletes I think worldwide I've ever seen. For the longest time, she has kept American tennis relevant and really kept American audiences encapsulated by her career. And that really is unique in the sense that I feel like American enthusiasm for tennis, especially on the men's side, has been pretty much diminished since Roddick and the last days of Andre and Pete. But over on the women's side, courtesy of the Williams sisters, eyes have been on those two, and especially Serena, who's been at the top of the game for so long, pretty much 2 decades. And she's absolutely a huge reason why this sport has remained popular in the States and even had some crossover into mainstream media. And I think this type of pull is consistent even all around the world in a way that only rivals Roger Federer, in the sense that you have the most casual of sports fans tuned in and zoned in watching Serena when she got into the later stages of majors. And that, among a pantheon GOAT-level career, I think has really stood out to me. You saw the type of pull she has in the crowds that she was garnering at the US Open this year. ESPN, I believe, had its highest viewed tennis match of all time in their time covering the sport, with Serena's last match against Tomljanovic. And even as a spectator at home, you could hear Ash buzzing in a way that I have never seen before. The way they got behind her really seemed to put a pep in her step again after a couple rough months coming in for her. And short of winning the tournament, I don't know that you could have wrote a more perfect script for the ending if this is it. She showcased some great tennis, and she showcased many of the championship qualities that have contributed to her GOAT-level career. That win against Kontaveit, as well as the tiebreak against Tomljanovic, and then staving off, 6 match points or so with just fearless winners. In the career of Serena Williams, I would say that those were time capsule moments. Someone who I consider to be the most important female athlete of all time. And lastly, my final takeaway has to do with taking this US Open for what it is. The US Open has been the most wide open Grand Slam for a really long time now. Even in the midst of the peak Big Four era, this was still the case. There's no need to blow things out of proportion and look at it and be like, the state of the tour is in shambles at the moment. Could this be the mark of the end of the Big Three? I mean, that question has been asked so many times over the years, and there really is no need to panic and overreact with that. You zoom out, they have won 3 of the 4 slams this year. The clock is ticking, but you would have to give them the benefit of the doubt that there is still some more to squeeze out there. And there's no need to degrade the rest of the tour for not being able to live up to their consistency. We have known for a long time nobody else is going to replicate that. At the same time, you need to rewind and look at this tournament. There have been some brilliant performances, some great matches, and I would still say it's been a fun US Open to watch thus far. And a lot of the guys who could go on to win this title still, just about every one of them would be a remarkable story, some more than others, of course. And for someone like an Alcaraz or a Sinner, it really could be a landmark win. So yeah, let's just take in the rest of this tournament and see what fate has in store. Once we have our semifinal matchups, I do plan on making predictions for that. And then at the commencement of this tournament, probably a Serena tribute. But that will do it for this particular video. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed. If you did, it would be much appreciated if you could drop a like, help this video perform a lot better in YouTube's algorithm, and of course subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Thank you again so much for watching, and of course I will see y'all in the next one.